This will be a non-spoiler review of Dune Messiah. This is one book that is extremely hard to describe without spoiling too much. Essentially, we're seeing Paul a bit in the future after the events of Dune proper, the first book. And it's a much, much smaller book, so it is much more readable, but a lot of fans don't like it. So what is the issue, or what is the problem, and what is good and bad about Dune Messiah? Well, it's, again, very hard to describe. Essentially, we're getting Paul as the emperor, and there has been the unleashing of the jihad, and the Fremen apparently are responsible for massacring billions, yes, billions of people. And Paul is trying to weigh what he can do because he has some powers to see the future, and he's trying to pick the best future, but it's a self-defeating process. On top of this, he wants to have a child with Shani, but because of what he can see in the future, he also doesn't want it. So it's playing with a lot of paradoxes of freedom and determinism. But the real story, as far as I see it, is this conspiracy against Paul by the Bene Gesserit, Ur-Yulan, Edric, who's part of the Spacing Guild, and others, and how they're going to try to basically use Paul's psychology against him and their war to basically bring down his empire. Now, some people appreciated that this book really went really far away from what they expected. I think we all expected to sort of have a kind of honeymoon period where we're going to see Paul and Shani slowly rebuild Arrakis and them focused on their love affair. And that's not what we get. We get a very distant Paul, someone who's extremely unlikable for most of the book, but we understand where he's coming from because, again, he's in a very unique, very odd position. So, again, a lot of the focus is going to be on the conspirators, but I guess most readers found them very boring or just really unlikable, and I will admit that their motivations seem very puzzling, especially Ur-Yulan. I frankly never understood why she cared about this issue so much. I can understand her feeling humiliated after the events of Dune, but why she cares so much about what Paul thinks, or her being a political wife, I didn't quite understand why that was a motivation for her rage. So there are parts of the book that feel much more weak or less drawn out than the first book, where the characters, I think, were much, 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 much better portrayed and rendered. Here, they're much more thin, and we get some old people and new people. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to say some old characters we thought were gone will be resurrected, and that's been a big source of controversy. Well, does this break the rules of the universe? How is this possible? Is this really that character? It's very, very complicated. And even in terms of the larger mythology of the Telexu, I think that's how you pronounce it, the Telexu, and how they are helping the conspiracy is also very controversial. It just seems very contradictory or nonsensical, or the rules laid out are just too convenient to the plot. I agree, there are a lot of issues with the plot and character, but I myself mostly liked it. I thought it was a very interesting and very powerful kind of conspiracy thriller. But I would insist that, yeah, this is much more of a thriller book than a kind of epic science fiction that the first book was. This is a very different change in focus, and so perhaps that shift in genre is just too much for people. I found it fairly likable. I enjoyed most of it. I thought Edric especially, I found him very charming and interesting, and his back and forth between the players and the conspiracy made a lot of sense. But it is retconning a lot of events in the first book. It expands the mythology, but it also is not contradicting, but it is complicating what we thought we knew from the first book. And I think just the shift in characterization will probably not work for people because they preferred that version of Paul, the Paul who is a hero. And I just think that there were enough clues and hints in the first book that it's not too shocking. It's not that radical a shift, but I think a lot of people, will be put off by the basic tone and frame of the book. And it just seems like a chore to get the children of Dune. I didn't think of it that way. I thought it was a very well-made book. I thought it was very well written. However, this will not work for everyone. I guess I can just say that it is short, relatively, for Frank Herbert. It's probably one of the shortest books in the saga, even by Brian Herbert standards. So even if this is not for you, it's not too of a chore. You can get through it through a couple of hours. There are, I think, a lot of interesting paradoxes it raises. But again, if you're more into the characters and just their story and the main plot of Dune, this will feel weak because this is more focused on the philosophy and the themes that Herbert wants to get to about power and politics. And maybe some people just find that a little too dry. I actually enjoy that about Dune, so it'll be very much people's taste. In terms of overall quality, I'm going to give this a confident 7.5. In terms of thrillers, it's fine. It's nothing groundbreaking, so it's not at the level of Dune of sort of redefining the genre, but I think it works mostly fine. I will say, though, the ending parts are very problematic. I'll just say the way that Paul's children work and how they work in the story, I thought was really too ridiculous. That's just insanely convenient for the plot. But I like the kind of religious tone and the kind of messianic irony that Paul ends up with. I'll just say that there's a lot of ironies in terms of where the people end up and how it sets up the future plots and why people act the way they do. I think most of that was well laid out, and you do get a big payoff with Children of Dune. Though again, even there, people are divided. So I think it's a very well written thriller, but I think people probably expected a different kind of book, and those expectations may be too much for you, and you'll just want to skip Dune Messiah. It's not super critical that you read the book. You can probably skip it because a lot of the plot details are things you can infer from Children of Dune. But I like spending time in its universe in terms of the more abstract philosophy and politics, but that may not be for everybody. People just want to get back to the main plot and spend more time with those characters and not necessarily the abstract, dry end of Dune. So it's very much up to your taste. So I'd recommend it, but don't be mad if this is not what you expected from a sequel to Dune itself. Thank you for listening.